Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, it's afternoon. We can kind of keep losing track of what's going on outside, so I don't know what time is it, but so it's the afternoon. So good afternoon, and welcome to this wonderful panel with Franck Le Ouay from Lifen, who also co-founded Criteo, and Elias from Qloo, based in New York. We're going to talk about data and how do you use data to thrive and grow your company. First, I would like to ask Frank, both of you, but let's start with Frank. How exactly do you use data, and how is it core to your business?
I can talk about Criteo and Lifen if you want. So Criteo was a data-driven company by essence, because the only thing you do is you analyze data and make it actionable. So you transform data into clicks and sales. So it's the company would not exist without analyzing data. So it was the sole purpose of this company was to analyze data and do something about it. My new company, Lifen, is a bit different. So we are in healthcare, and we are trying to help practitioners and doctors better communicate. So it's totally different use case. But I think in some cases, using tools, data analysis tools can help you achieve things that you wouldn't be possible otherwise. So it's a very different use case, but we can talk more about it if you want. But
yeah, so hi. Qloo, my company, we call it cultural AI is what we've developed, and data is kind of the lifeblood of that. We've essentially developed data science not unlike what Netflix does behind the scenes or Spotify, but we cover a wide variety of categories. So we cover traditional media, geolocation, consumer products, and we make that available through an open ecosystem of what are called APIs. And without data, none of the machine learning, none of the artificial intelligence would be doing would really have any blood flowing through it, so to speak. So data is core to our whole business.
And who are using your tools right now, so everybody can really know what you are doing and what market you are attacking? So who are your customers?
So Criteo's customers are all many advertisers. Many e-commerce websites. Lifen customers are mostly hospitals and doctors.
So our customers are basically everyone in media, entertainment, consumer products that isn't an Amazon or a Netflix where they roll their own, so to speak. So that's a lot of financial services companies. We work with some of the biggest hotel booking platforms. Some of the biggest streaming platforms actually recently within music and movies that basically have a need to either augment their current efforts with data or expand to new categories, because part of the most unique thing Qloo does is being able to go from one category to another. So take an input in music and predict the preferences across dining, or fashion, and so on. So if a business needs to do that, they're a potential customer.
And do you have any example that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tablet Hotels, for instance, a large online booking platform, uses Qloo to help recommend, like Netflix, which hotels would be most appropriate to a customer. In terms of going across domains, we work with some large fashion brands to help predict, for instance, the music taste, so who to do a collaboration with. Financial services, a large credit card company, has great data with regards to which merchant someone swiped their card at, but they rely on Qloo to essentially, in a fully anonymized way, be able to make predictions or guesses about which music might be correlated to an array of spend data, so that they dole out the right concert ticket pre-sale to the right person, for instance. So there's quite a few out there, and our website has a list of a lot of customer case studies and so on.
And you both have dozens of employees right now. What is the biggest challenge to start this type of company, and where do you start in terms of engineering, hiring? What is the biggest challenge?
Hiring data scientists is becoming hard in Paris. It was when I started Criteo 10 years ago. It was easy. Now it's so trendy and hot that it's becoming harder. So that's a difficulty. But apart from that, you just have to get going. You have to identify what specific project you want to work on and assemble the right team and just get going.
Yeah, to echo Franck's sentiment, we're based in New York City. Most of our engineering team is out there. And the biggest challenge we have is that we're competing, now everyone is essentially a data-driven organization to a certain extent. So we're now competing with the Goldman Sachses of the world for one of our chief data scientists we actually hired away from Goldman Sachs. And it was not an easy process because convincing him to leave the safety and the luxury of Goldman Sachs and come to our office with 3 dogs, a former art gallery, and so on was not easy. And, it was definitely, I think that's increasingly becoming a problem, is that technology startups and companies are now competing with huge incumbents that are not just the Googles and so on.
And you recently also acquired a company, a European company. So can you tell us about it and how do you blend this culture and
yeah, absolutely. I think Andre here? Actually, there he is. He was very kind to come in from Amsterdam so TasteDive. Andre is the founder of TasteDive. It basically does what Qloo does for businesses, but for consumers. It's an amazing site, millions of users, and it's basically one of the most highly scaled recommendation engines we've seen for media and entertainment. So if you want to find a new movie to watch, a new book to read, etc. And it was an interesting process getting to know, but we got along really well on a personal level, and the missions kind of aligned really well. And I think one of the biggest challenges, obviously, with the remote teams is it's never going to be the same as having people have ad hoc interactions around the office and solving problems and being able to talk to the chief data scientist on command. There's always the issue of schedule, and it comes with the territory of having remote offices. But I think we've been pretty sensitive to that, wouldn't you say, Andre? In terms of trying to make sure that he feels like he's present in the discussions and things aren't happening outside of his purview. So.
And Franck, you run a few acquisitions at Criteo when you were at Criteo, and not yet for Lifen. Not yet. Is it something that you think you would have to grow, or is it something that you don't even think about?
I mean, it's not something I plan. No, you don't plan an acquisition. You want to grow, and if you see an opportunity that is a good one, then you investigate it. And it's not something you want to do. It's not part of the plan to do something like this.
But is there any keys, because you successfully buy multiple companies while you were at Criteo, is there patterns that you've seen that you think you can...
What I can tell is that buying a company and integrating a company is very hard. When you start, at Criteo we've had a few... We've had a few failures, but it's okay. I mean, you have to start somewhere, and it's super hard to integrate. I think the best way is to, because usually you have cultural problem, you have different locations, you also have different products, different tech stacks. So how do you, and then you have a business to run. So it's complicated to make choices as to which constraint are you going to remove. Like, are you going to relocate people? Are you going to change the tech stack? Are you going to stop the roadmap and integrate? So it's super complex to do. So.
And of course, everybody sells in a startup. Everybody is a key to my company. But in a data-driven company, is there a certain people or certain jobs that are really key to the core of the business that you really cherish more than the other?
Yeah, I would say, and this might be a little counterintuitive, but I think that increasingly people on the ground level of data management, so the database engineers as opposed to, say, the data scientists, we found our biggest issues have been when those people haven't been top-notch. And I think part of the reason is that data science, to some extent, is becoming more and more commoditized. So Google is open sourcing their TensorFlow libraries, which are some of the state-of-the-art, neural networks. You have the Apache Foundation that's open sourcing a lot of their models. So what's happening over time is that the models and the data science is becoming somewhat commoditized, whereas the data itself is really the differentiator. And if the database isn't clean and there isn't like a real focus on quality and nuance, then everything else is a disaster. You know, and I think we've found that over time we used to ignore the database side and sort of focus on the flashy, you know, building proprietary models and things around data. But over time we've realized that you know, and it tends to be a lot of older engineers, interestingly, because it's, you know, as opposed to hiring the young hotshot as a data scientist, it tends to be the guy who worked at like a utility, you know, for Con Ed, the power company in New York, for 40 years. You know, that those are the best people, and they're hard to hire because they never come on the market. You know, they have so much know-how. So yeah, I think that's kind of that's something we've learned the hard way, you know.
So one role which is very important for us is the security role, because we handle very sensitive data. So this is something we cannot compromise. So we work a lot on that. And it's all the more complicated and difficult to analyze the data when you cannot access it. So the data, the healthcare data doesn't belong to us, it belongs to the patient, to the hospital, etc. So we have super strict rules as to what happens and how we can analyze it.
Okay. And a year ago, Mark Zuckerberg was here right after Cambridge Analytica trying to hold the world together. So my question is, there's been a lot of progress in terms of privacy. How do you tackle that? Is it a bigger subject for you now, and how do you tackle it?
For us, it's a good thing, actually, because when you are in healthcare, you don't want to mess with any kind of these rules. So you want to be super, super strict about who has access to what, etc. So all these regulations go into the direction that we think is the right one and the one that we had already. So I think for us it was not a big change because we were prepared, and we think it's the right one, at least for healthcare.
Yeah, we had a similar experience where we started building our company in 2012, began licensing in 2015, and some of our earliest customers were in financial services that was already a heavily regulated space. And we found that as a new company, no one wanted to share PII with us. And so we had to design our capabilities in an anonymized way. So we call it entity-based personalization as opposed to identity-based. So it's based on entities like restaurants or music artists, as opposed to people's identity, the way that an Axiom or Cambridge Analytica and so on. So we were lucky in a way because we were kind of GDPR compliant by design, and because of that, we've seen a lot of growth in our business, post last May when GDPR took hold, because we found that we're uniquely suited. There was actually a customer that's big in the music space that took a look at our capabilities 3 years ago and said, you know what, if you don't have identities, we're not interested, because we're getting all this data about people's preferences, just buying it based on their deterministic identity. Qloo operates on probabilities. It's making an educated guess. And so they came back last year and said, you know what, we can't work with any of those companies anymore. Can we take a look at what you're doing? And so yeah, I think to some extent it was something that was an obstacle for us in the past and has become one of our biggest competitive advantages. And frankly, we're just lucky because we stayed alive long enough to to kind of take advantage of that.
And I think there's two questions from the panel right now. The first one that I see is kind of an extension of what we just discussed, but maybe we can go a little deeper because it reflects the data becoming harder and harder to get. And what do you think will be the next challenge for data-driven companies?
Interesting question. I mean, it's so large. I don't know. I don't know what to answer.
Are you thinking maybe it's going to be more regulation, and then you have to maybe advance in this field, or?
I think that's kind of normal. Like, in the past, it was the Wild West. Like you could do anything with all kind of data. We've seen, we've seen the consequence of that. I think it's fine, okay, and reasonable to think that even if you are handling data, there should be rules as to what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to store, how long do you store the data, why do you do that? I mean, it's all fine and reasonable. So I understand that when, as a data scientist, you want to hold as much data as possible because you don't know at the beginning what you're going to try to do in the future. But at the same time, I think regulation is good, and otherwise, I mean, it's going to have other consequences.
Will you launch Criteo today?
It would be a different story. I think it would be much harder to launch Criteo today than it was 10 years ago, but maybe not for that reason. It's a much more competitive place now than it used to be, so it would be harder today.
Yeah, so to that previous question, yeah, so I think the regulatory landscape, presents a lot of opportunities for small companies because you see a lot of the huge incumbents actually curtailing a lot of their data-driven offerings. So Oracle, I think, recently wrote off a lot of acquisitions they'd made around data, around selling data. So I think there's interesting opportunities for insurgents to build a niche area that's compliant and offers interesting value. And I think the next big challenge, I think that was part of the question, is probably building causality into models to some extent, because I think there's been a lot of kind of reckless use of machine learning to just, because the efficacy is so strong, to just let a neural net do its thing and, the predictions work. But particularly in healthcare and other areas, where the stakes are a bit higher, I think being more nuanced about the assumptions models are making and so on is going to be a huge challenge for companies.
We're going to keep track with those questions from the panel. It's just up here on those screens, so that's why I'm looking like this. Any plans on using or selling data for some other use than marketing? I mean, you already do that.
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends on your business and what you sell. So for example, at Life, and we sell a service for doctors to better exchange medical data. So it's a productivity tool. So we sell as a SaaS business to our customers. And of course, we don't do marketing. It's not in the plan.
Yeah, we currently do. There's a lot of use cases outside of marketing for the data. We work with large movie studios and producers, for instance, on deciding how to package and score a film, what actors to hire, if they're adapting a book, what are the most correlated X, Y, and Z in the film world. We've had a number of academic use cases kind of reach out wanting to test and see what the model shows for different trends and so on. So there's a lot of use cases outside of marketing that we're excited about, perhaps most excited about.
And the new player that created new use, like Netflix, for example, how do they shape the new model of using data? Do they change anything in the way you collect and use data afterwards?
So the question was about how Netflix, how the presence of Netflix has kind of changed?
This kind of player.
Yeah, so, well, it actually, Netflix in many ways was a lot of the impetus for us starting the company, because Netflix famously had $1 million prize back in 2008 that was basically geared towards who could improve the efficacy of their algorithms by the greatest extent, and it was all DVDs at that time. But there was kind of a ceiling that was very rapidly hit. And our feeling was if we actually took a view outside of just film and built these cross-domain models, we could make smarter inferences in any category. So I think the presence of large data-driven businesses like that actually kind of paved the way for interesting, new companies to emerge, because you see some of the flaws in it and some of the challenges, and then it's a new, business opportunity.
And Frank, maybe on your field, what is it? What do we need to improve so you go faster? Because it's fascinating what you do. You're helping doctors and the old medical system to go faster and to exchange data and everything. What are we missing?
That's a long story. You know, healthcare is not the most rapidly changing industry. So you have many actually roadblocks that you have to go over. So one of them is just the fact that, for example, you have many public players, public clients. So you need to go through public tenders, etc. It's a very long process to sell. In healthcare, you know, like they don't. It's not like Facebook, which famously said, I think, fail fast, right? You don't fail fast in healthcare, so kill sick, don't fail fast. So again, they like things that are very robust. They don't really know startups. When you sell to hospitals for a 4-year contract, they're like, okay, will you be there in 2 years? So it's a different world.
And one question about investment, because you both have a great history of funding about your company. Alex, you have one famous investor in your company, and you have you took Criteo to the IPO, and then you have a great first round also. So my question is, how the investor are mature about those subjects, and is it easy to get them on board?
So how well like investors understand our model, and I would say increasingly and surprisingly, you know, there's we have a few famous investors early on, like Leonardo DiCaprio and, you know, Elton John, and it was actually surprising how much they understood about, you know, they're all business people at the end of the day, and, you know, Leo has a production company that has used Qloo in order to inform some of the films they decided to produce and so on, and so they, you know, I think the best investors are usually those that have a pain point that relates to the underlying problem or solution you're building. And AXA, of course, the French company, is you know, been an amazing supporter for us as well.
So I would answer maybe the question in a different way. I would say, what startup today gets funding without being data-driven? You know, like if you have to be data-driven if you want to succeed today.
So it's easy to get some money?
It's a requirement. It doesn't mean it's just that.
Yeah?
No, not easy, no. It's been very hard for us.
Well, I think we are up now. Anyone want to ask a question? We took a question from the panel, but maybe we have one here. Nope. Okay. So we're done. Well, thank you, Frank and Alex. I think we can thank them for sharing us.
Thank you.
Thank
with
you.
us the view.